Hey guys, this is Steve from CG Geek, and today we're going to be taking a look at how to use Blender for the absolute beginner. So maybe you've heard about Blender and you've seen some of the amazing short films created in Blender and some of the amazing artworks, and you've heard about just how powerful it is. So you've downloaded it, and now you don't know where to start. You've opened it up, and all you see is these confusing buttons, and you don't know what you're doing, you feel lost. Well, this video is geared at getting you started, and is going to kind of get you comfortable with the user interface, where your buttons are, how to kind of operate in 3D, and hopefully get you started and give you the confidence you need to continue and have some fun in Blender. So if you've downloaded Blender, you're going to first see the splash screen here when you open it up, and this just shows your recent files and some links. You can just left click this and it'll be gone. So here we have the 3D view. This is the most used window, I'd say, in Blender. This is where most of your work is going to be done if you're creating anything in 3D. And let's kind of get comfortable manipulating around and seeing what we can do here. So first off, I recommend using a full-size keyboard and a 3-button mouse. But if you're working off a laptop like I was when I started, and you might easily be, there's some settings that will make it easier for you using that. So first, we're going to go to user preferences and see what might help if you're using a laptop. So first off, you want to go to input, and here you can see we have the option to emulate the NUMPAD. So this is going to make your 1 through 9 keys work as the NUMPAD keys would in 3D. So you're going to want to click that if you're on a laptop. And then the emulate 3-button mouse. This will let you use Alt, and then when you left click, it's going to work like the middle mouse button. So again, if you don't have a 3-button mouse and you're working off a laptop, click that and it'll work like the middle mouse button does. Okay, so now that those settings are changed, if you're running a laptop, you'll be ready to go as well. And we're just going to start moving around in 3D. So to do this, we're going to click with our middle mouse wheel, and we can zoom around our 3D cube here. So here we have a cube, a camera, and a lamp. And these are the 3 items that come added already in your Blender scene. These are the default objects. And we're just going to kind of get comfortable moving around and selecting different objects. So with middle mouse button, you can pan around your cube. And with right click, you can select different objects. Now, most people find this confusing because they're used to left clicking to select something. But in Blender 3D, the left click will move your 3D cursor, and that is the crosshairs you see in the middle of your cube here. So left clicking will move your 3D cursor, and the 3D cursor is used to be basically a placement in 3D space to add things and manipulate things with. So basically, if I was to add another object to our scene here, it would be added where the 3D cursor is placed. Now, if you want to reset your 3D cursor to be in the center of your scene, it's just Shift S on your keyboard, and then cursor to center. So that is handy if you accidentally moved your cursor and then you want to move it back because you messed up. Just Shift S and it resets it. Okay, so get comfortable just panning around your cube and selecting different things with right click. Once you're comfortable with that, we'll start moving around holding Shift, and this is just going to pan left and right. So this is going to pan side to side on our 3D view. So this is good for kind of getting a different angle on your object or moving around to a different spot. And if you ever get kind of lost in 3D, like you pan too far over and you can't see your object anymore, just hit the period on your NUMPAD keys and it will reset you to the object you had selected there. And then you can just use the scroll wheel on your mouse to zoom out. Again, if you are on a laptop though, it is the plus and minus keys to zoom in and out. Alright, so now that we know how to kind of move around in 3D space and select things, let's delete something. Alright, so let's delete this default cube. I'm just going to right click it, and then it's X on your keyboard to delete. You get a little pop-up window here, and then you left click the delete, and it is gone. But what if you wanted that back? Well, then it is Shift A on your keyboard to bring up your add menu, and then you can see right here, mesh, cube, and our cube is back. So that's pretty cool. And yeah, so you can also add objects over in your toolbar. Now your toolbar is going to change depending on what window you are in, but this is where all of your different settings for that view is going to be laid out. So here you can see we can rotate and scale and translate our mesh, and this is done also with shortcut keys, and that is R to rotate. So as soon as you hit R, you'll be able to rotate your cube by moving your mouse. If you don't want to rotate it, then you can just hit escape and it will clear it. And then S will scale your mouse whenever you move your cursor if you hit S, and then you hit escape again to cancel that. and G will grab your object and it will follow the mouse cursor wherever you move it. So that is the same as clicking one of these settings here and using the toolbar. So I highly recommend getting comfortable with the shortcut keys in Blender, because then you can be working with both hands and moving very fast and efficiently in Blender. Okay, so let's try a different mode now. This is object mode, and this is where we have our solid meshes. But what if you wanted to kind of manipulate this mesh and change it to not be a cube, but something else? Well, you would do that in edit mode. So edit mode, you can get to it by coming down here and clicking edit mode, or by hitting tab on your keyboard. And this is where you can deform your mesh. Basically, you can grab any of the vertices and change the way it looks. So say we wanted to make this a triangle, we would select this vertice here, hold down shift and right click this vertice, and then we can grab the transformation handles here. This is going to move it down along the Z axis, and we could turn it right into a triangle just by doing that. And then if you hit tab, you can see we have a triangular mesh. So that is what object mode is meant for. It's meant for deforming your objects. So you can cancel this then with Control Z, and you're back to having your mesh. So that is how you use edit mode and object mode. Now there's plenty of different modes here. You have sculpt mode, vertex, weight paint, and these are all for texturing and doing other things like that that we don't really need to worry about right now. But then there's also different windows. So these are the different modes within this window. But you can change the window here in the bottom corner from 3D view to your movie clip editor, to your video sequence editor, to your node editor. So this is where you can get to all the different settings in Blender. Say you wanted to edit videos, you'd want to go to your video sequence editor. Now these are the different windows, and up here we have our different presets. So here we have the default, but if you want to go to video editing, you might click down here, and you have your timeline and your video previews here for video editing. Or if you wanted to do something like motion tracking, you have it right here, and so forth. So I'm just going to go back to default view. And let's kind of work with our windows now. So if you've noticed, every single window in Blender has this little grab icon in the bottom corner. And this is meant to be able to manipulate your windows and customize it however you want. So say I want to add a material to this cube here. I might do that with the node editor or the material editor. So what I would do is I would grab this corner here, drag it over, and now I have two windows. Now this is where some people can get stuck because they have these windows and they don't know how to get rid of them then and stuff. But it's really not that confusing. You can always grab the center bar there and slide your window back and forth. And if you want to ever get rid of that window, you grab this window and drag it over, and then it just removes that window. So it gets confusing though when you have multiple windows. So you pull this one out, and then you pull this one up, and you have three windows. But now you can't cancel that out anymore. You can't move that, and you might be like, why can't I get rid of those windows? Well, that's because you first need to combine these two by dragging this one down, and then you can grab this one and drag it over. So I highly recommend you guys just kind of getting comfortable moving windows around, dragging new windows into your scene, and then getting rid of them, and being able to kind of move around Blender that way. So it's going to be really important to get comfortable with that. But once you're ready to move on, we'll get into some of the other features. So most tutorials now you'll find on YouTube, including myself, is going to be using the Cycles render engine. So that is going to be changed up here from Blender render to Cycles render. And this is just because Cycles is so much more powerful right now that you're going to be having the most realism and the best looking results using Cycles. So you're going to want to be switching to Cycles render most often if you're going to be working with materials and stuff in Blender. So now that you've done that, we can kind of drag our window a little larger here by grabbing that corner. And I'm going to kind of look at some of these settings over on the right hand side. So here, this is our render settings. This is where we're going to choose like our output for our files, our different render settings here, our different samplings. This is for changing anything that involves rendering, really. If you want to render with more detail and samples, then you go here and change your render samples. And this is where you can change all of your renderer settings. So because we're under Cycles, we have all of our Cycles render settings right here. So then moving on, we have our render layers. This is similar to if you've used Photoshop or something. You have different layers where you can render different objects on a different layer. Moving on then, we have our scene info, we have our world info, we have our object info, and these are all settings that you don't really need to use right off the bat, but it's just handy to know where they are in case you ever get lost. We have our constraints, our modifiers, our object data, our materials. This is where you might spend a lot of time. Our textures, our particle systems, and our physics. So these are all the different modes for doing different cool things in Blender. So we don't want to overwhelm you by showing you all the different settings all at once. So we're just going to kind of work around and use some of the basic settings that we need to do something cool. So I'm just going to click back to our 3D view here. And what if you want to add another object to your scene? Well, you'd want to make sure that your cursor is in the center because we're going to be adding, say, a floor to our scene here. And then you'd go Shift A, and you'd go add a mesh plane. You can see we have different options for a cone or a circle or a UV sphere, but we're going to be adding a plane now, and this is just a flat surface area. So you can see it's added right there, but it's inside of our cube. So I'm just going to hit S on my keyboard to scale that plane up. Now, when you're scaling, you can also use your number keys to type in a number to scale to an exact amount. So if I scale 8, if I hit 8 on my number pad right now, it's going to scale it 8 times. And it's just going to fill my, my floor grid here. So that's great. That's all I want to do right now. And cool. Now I'm just going to right-click that cube. And what if I want to move this to be sitting on that floor plane? I'm going to grab the Z controller handle here and just pull it up along the Z axis and let go. You could also do this by using G and then hitting Z on your keyboard to move it just up and down along the Z axis. This works the same for X and Y. So if you want to move it left or right, you go G and X, and this is going to move it along the X axis, or you hit Y, and this is going to move it along the Y axis. All right, so now what if we wanted to give our cube a different color? For example, I want a red cube. So then we'd go over to our Materials tab here, we'd click New Material, and then we'd change the color here to be red. Now, you don't see anything change here, and that's because in the viewport it's going to remain the solid object color. But if you go down here, where you can change the viewport shading options, you could change it to Material, and then you'd see you have your red material. You can also change it to rendered view, and this is going to be rendering with the Cycles render engine. And you can go back to solid view and change the viewport color in the settings tab here to also be red. So you're just going to click that. I'm using left click, grab that dropper, and choose the red color. So now we have a red cube. Cool. What are we going to do with this cube though? Well, good question. Why don't we drop it from the sky onto this plane? That sounds like fun. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the top Z-axis handle here and pull it upwards along the Z. And now I'm going to use some physics in Blender to do something cool. So this is going to be done in your Physics tab. I'm going to move to the End Physics tab here. And with that cube selected, we're going to click Rigid Body. Now, Rigid Body is the physics options built into Blender. And so if you click that, it's going to add in the rigid body physics to that cube. And now we have some more settings here. Now, don't worry about all the settings that look confusing because we don't even have to use any of them. We can just leave it just like that. And if we hit play in our timeline down here, this is the timeline. You can see it's set up to be 250 frames. And this is the frame that we're on. So we're on frame 1. And this is our play, forward, backwards buttons, just like you would see in any video player. So if you click play, you're going to see that our cube drops realistically out of 3D space. So that's cool, but we want it to interact with our floor. Now this is just going to continue looping in our timeline here, and going to continue until we stop it. So we're just going to go ahead and click pause, and then we're going to click the jump back to frame 1 option, and let's add some physics to our floor. So I'm going to, again, right-click to select that plane, click Rigid Body, and then I'm going to change it to not be dynamic. I'm sorry, not that. I'm going to change it from active to passive. I want to leave that will automatically be changed. You just change the type to passive. Now, this is just going to be basically a solid object that doesn't move or anything. that will interact with other objects. So if you click play now, you can see that the cube lands and bounces off of our floor. Awesome, that's exactly what we wanted it to do. So you can see now that we have that, we have two objects interacting with each other realistically with a material on it. So that's cool. We've already done something pretty cool in Blender. Well, let's do something even cooler. Let's take this cube and let's duplicate it multiple times and have multiple cubes falling from the sky, because that's awesome. So what we're going to do is I'm going to zoom out with my middle mouse wheel. I'm going to hold shift and my middle mouse button to kind of move my view up a little higher here. And then I'm going to hover over my cube. I'm going to hit shift and D. And this is going to duplicate my mesh, just like clicking duplicate would over here in our toolbar. So I'm going to hit shift D and we'll move that cube, and it's going to follow our mouse cursor until we left click. So I'll just left click right there, and now we have two cubes. And if I hit play in our timeline, you'll see both the cubes falling and bouncing off the ground realistically. So that's pretty cool. Let's add some more. So I'm going to jump back to frame 1, shift D again, move that cube over here, shift D again, move that cube over here. Now I might want to move around in 3D to see what it's looking like from a different angle. So I could use my number pad keys to jump from front view with number pad 1, side view with number pad 3, or top view with number pad 7, or you could use 4, 2, 6, and 8 to kind of move around like you would in a video game, just kind of zooming around. So I'm going to kind of pan around to the, well, I'm just going to go to the right view by hitting 3 on my number pad, and then I'm going to hit shift D and add a few more from this view. Very cool. Now, if you hit 5 on your keyboard, it's going to go into orthographic view, and this basically makes it look 2D. It basically takes the perspective out of your view and is useful for a lot of different situations, but in this case we don't really need it. It's just there in case you do. So hitting 5 is going to go from perspective to orthographic. Okay, so now that we have multiple cubes sitting in our 3D space, I'm just moving around with our middle mouse wheel. I'm going to add one more over here, and let's give them some different materials. So I'm going to click on this one. I'm going to click on our material tab, and I'm going to click this button next to the material to make it a separate material. So clicking that will make a new material. You can see it's now material 2. And I'm just going to change this color to be blue. So clicking on our color wheel there with our left click, we have a blue color. You might see that it doesn't change, but that's just because the viewport color is still red. So we're just going to grab that, click that color dropper, and make it blue. So now we have a blue cube. And let's just go ahead and do that same thing on all of these. We'll make this one green. Click that color, left click the dropper, and make that one green. And you can see that they all change. And that's because I didn't click that button like I told you to earlier. So you're going to want to click that button, and now it's its own material. So we can click this one, click this drop down box, and you can see we have our different materials here. And I'm just going to grab the third one here. And then I'm going to change this one to be red. Change it there, and change it there. And now we have our red color back. So that's pretty cool. And let's just add one more blue cube by selecting this one, and then going to our material drop down and selecting the blue material. Okay, so now we have a handful of different colors here, and it's looking pretty colorful. So now if we hit play, well, it's going to be awesome because we're going to have, what, 8 cubes all dropping to the ground, realistically bouncing off each other. So that's pretty cool. Let's do a little bit more. Let's change the scale and rotation of these cubes. So as I showed you before, we're going to right click a cube. We're going to hit S to scale it down. We might scale this one up a little bit. So I'm going to hit S and scale this one up. I might rotate this one. So I'm going to right click it and hit R and rotate it. And I'll do the same with this one. I'll hit R and rotate it. I'll scale this one down a little bit smaller. I'll scale this one. Oh, I already scaled that one. I'll right click this one and I'll rotate it. I'll right click this one and I'll rotate it a little bit as well. Maybe I'll move it with G over here a little bit more. And maybe I'll move this one by hitting G and moving it a bit too. And then I'll kind of pan around, and it's looking pretty cool. So let's see what this looks like. So if I hit play, they'll all fall to the ground and bounce off each other realistically. Pretty cool. So the last thing we can do is we can kind of change the physics for each of these cubes depending on their size. So this is getting a little bit more advanced, but it's going to be cool because it's going to be a little bit more realistic. So to do this, we first have to apply the different transformations that we did to these. So because we scaled some of them, we have to tell Blender that that is now the default size value for that cube. So to do that, I'm just going to hit B on my keyboard, and this will bring up a box select option. So you can select multiple things by clicking with your left click and dragging. So I'm going to grab all of those cubes. And now over in my physics tab here, so in my toolbar, I'm going to drop down to my physics tab. I'm going to click that, and you'll see you have some rigid body tools. Here I'm going to go, well, before I do anything here, I first have to apply the scale. So to do that, you're going to go Control A and apply the scale. And I'm also going to apply the rotation, so just rotation and scale, left click, and there you have it. Now you can click Calculate Mass. Now before I do that, I want to show you what it changes. So in our Physics tab here, you can see that all of our cubes have a mass of 1. Well, if I click Calculate Mass, depending on the size of that cube, it's going to change basically the weight of the cube. So the bigger cube will drop faster, and a smaller cube might drop slower. So it'll be a little bit more realistic. So go ahead and click Calculate Mass now, and you have all these different options. I'm just going to choose, well, let's just do brick common. So then it'll be the weight of a common brick depending on the size of them. Okay, so now when we play, we'll have a little bit more variation in how quickly they drop and how they react with each other. So that's pretty cool. We've just created our first looping animation in Blender. So it goes on a little longer than we want. So let's make the end frame to be 100 instead of 250. So I'm just going to click there and then type in 100. And now I'm going to click this to jump back to our beginning settings here. And I'll click play, and we'll watch our cubes drop to the ground. Now you can use your middle mouse wheel to kind of get a different angle on that, see it from every view, and yeah, that's pretty cool. We have a simulation in Blender. Now, what's really cool is as this is going, you can select something like our bottom plane here and move it around in real time to kind of bounce those cubes around. So just kind of having fun and seeing how the physics work with the different weights and everything. It's pretty cool. So that is the introduction to Blender, guys. We have created a little animation here. We've kind of gotten into how to add materials, how to kind of manipulate your mesh, and how to change the shape of it. Now, the last thing I want to do is I want to go to edit mode, and I want to make one of these a triangle instead of a square. So to do that, I'm going to grab this cube here with left click. I'm going to tab into edit mode, and I'm going to grab those two vertices again and drag them down along the Z to make a triangle. With left click I did that, and then I'm just going to hit tab to get out of edit mode. And yeah, now if we play this, we have a triangular shape bouncing around like a triangle might. Now you have the different shapes over here, and this is going to be depending on the collisions. You might want to change that depending on your mesh, but because these are all just basic shapes, we can leave it at convex hull. And there you have it. So maybe I'll duplicate this triangle one more time with Shift D. I'll hit R to rotate, just so we have some more variation in our simulation. So that's going to kind of wrap up our beginner introduction into how to use Blender. We kind of covered a lot of the different settings and the placements of things, and we kind of created something pretty cool. So yeah, if you like this video, definitely check out some of the other videos I have on my channel here and create something else that's pretty cool. And I'd like to give a huge shout out to all of my Patreon followers for supporting me all this time. And if you'd like to be a Patreon and gain access to all the finished files on this channel, then you can sign up over here, and I really appreciate the support. But that's going to do it for me, guys, and I'll see you later. Bye!